Okay. Let me just double check. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Now we have 9. So, Emily, have you shown up?
Yes, I'm here.
Emily Coble?
Yes.
Okay.
That's me.
And did Bethany show up? Doesn't look like it. All right. Okay. But then there's one person who's not on my list. Who is that? That's Sarah, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Everybody should have a copy of the syllabus. I'm Dr. Sherman, by the way, if that's not already clear. So let's go over the syllabus first. And I just spent the last hour and uploaded a whole bunch of different materials to the D2L website. We won't go through all of those, but we'll talk about some of them. Today I'll probably kind of give a brief general overview of the period. I don't know what your backgrounds are. We might kind of go around, not the room, but the screen, I guess, and see what your background is in Old English, what you've read, etc. So let me first go to share screen and not that. Where is not pipeline? Hold on just a second. I think I've got to pull that page open first. I didn't use Zoom at all last spring when we went online. I just used old recorded lectures that I had. Okay, so there we go. Syllabus. And I'm going to pull up the PDF version. Hopefully it will all show. Yeah, there we go. Office doesn't matter because I won't be there at all probably this semester. If you need to reach me, the best way to reach me is via email. I know I put down D2L chat and email. I've not used the chat before. We'll see how it works. But you can use either the D2L email or you can use just my regular MTSU email, which is ted.sherman@mtsu.edu. Just first name, dot, last name, at mtsu.edu. That one I check much more frequently than D2L. And sorry to say, I'm connected /online 12 to 16 hours a day. So if you email me, the odds are you're going to get a response within an hour or two. Something's wrong if you don't hear back from me within 4 or 5 hours. I've family emergency or something like that. So those are going to be the best ways to get in touch with me. Required texts. Hopefully you've gotten these. If you haven't, say something to let me know, because the Marsden one is really the most important. You need to have that like now. Don't wait till next week because you'll already be behind. But Marsden, and I grabbed, this is the first, I don't know if you can see that very well. This is the first edition, and then this is the second edition. They're essentially the same. I think there are some minor corrections in the second edition, and I don't think there's any additional readings. I don't think he changed the reference grammar at the back. He might have added some entries in the glossary. Pagination, I'm pretty sure, is just about the same. I'm checking. Nope. Okay, so he did add a few different readings, which we're not doing. So if you bought the first edition, that that won't be a problem. So there's that, and then there's two that I added somewhat later. Michael Alexander's A History of Old English Literature from Broadview Press. It's not very much, $20, $30, I think. But this gives a nice overview by both period and genre of the Anglo-Saxon period. And I've got specific readings assigned for specific nights. We won't talk about that a whole lot. We will a little bit. But that's good for background. And then the third one, and this is the least important of the three. Marsden is most important. Alexander is next. And then James Campbell et al.'s Anglo-Saxons, large format penguin book, heavily illustrated, a lot of maps, a lot of diagrams, small print. This gives you the historical background. I haven't always used this book. I think I've used this book. I created this course in 95, and I don't think this was out then. I think I've used this book 3 or 4 times. I used Frank Stenton's Anglo-Saxon England 2 or 3 times, which is a history text about the thickness of the Marsden book. I mean, it's dull and dry, but it's packed. It is just packed with information. So those are the required texts. I don't have the other unrequired texts or the strongly suggested texts in front of me, but I do want to talk about those for at least a couple of minutes. So the next one, Stephen Barney's A Word Hoard. May not even be in print. I didn't actually check this time. And it's not a dictionary. It's a list of the most commonly used words in Old English. And it kind of shows you their contexts. It talks a little bit about their etymology, their history, things like that. It's really, really helpful for when you're doing translations, because you might come across a word that has an entry in the glossary, and you're kind of like, you might get an odd feeling like maybe there's more to that word than what the glossary is saying. Well, word hoard might, if it's a fairly common word, word hoard might give you a little bit more. Okay, the next book on the list, and I'm going to talk about word hoard again in a moment when I talk about parsing exercises. The other book, lost my place, J.R. Clark Hall's Concise Anglo-Saxon Dictionary. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's a dictionary of Anglo-Saxon, and it's concise, even though it's about the same size as the Marsden book. It's concise because it is a briefer version of the Bosworth-Taller Anglo-Saxon Dictionary, which I'm trying to see if I have anything. Yeah, this will kind of work. Which is more like this size, okay? 4 inches, 3.5 inches thick, okay? In quarter folio size. So the J.R. Clark Hall version is a much shorter, much condensed form of that. It's also very helpful when you're doing translations, because one of the things you'll notice when you get into Marsden as you're translating is you'll come across a word, and the word might have, one main meaning given, and then he'll cite several different instances of that, or several different instances of where the word is used. If you get into Clark Hall, or if you get into Bosworth-Taller, and the Bosworth-Taller is available online. I haven't put a link up for it. I don't think I have up for it yet, but it is available online. Or the Dictionary of Old English, which Badger, hey, that was me. Badger, shush. Okay, now they ran out. The Dictionary of Old English will have everything. So you can put in the word you want, and it'll give you every instance of the use of that word in the entire Anglo-Saxon corpus. You can put in a portion of the word, and it'll give you every instance of those strings of letters in the Anglo-Saxon corpus, which is really useful if you get into word studies and decide to do a word study type paper, for example. I had a graduate student several years ago, took the Old English and Beowulf, got really interested in the word hyrde, Hyrde, which means shepherd, or guardian, or protector, or sometimes king. So notice, that one word, just those 4 different meanings right there. And she got very interested in how it was used, and she ended up doing her master's thesis looking at that word first primarily in Beowulf, and then in every instance in the Anglo-Saxon corpus, and kind of made an argument. What she essentially wrote was a dissertation, so we had to make her pare down from roughly about 400 pages to about 200 pages. So if she wants to go on and do her dissertation, it's already written, essentially. Okay. The other background material. Bede, Ecclesiastical History of the English People. I strongly would recommend reading that. It's not hard reading. It can be a little dull. Okay. It's written in 731, so, it doesn't have that modern narrative flair, let's say. But the Ecclesiastical History of the English People, which is essentially about the founding of England and the history of the church in England from its beginning, okay? With this exception, Bede doesn't say much about Christianity in the British Isles before the coming of Augustine in 597. He's got a little bit, but not a lot. So it doesn't treat the earlier Celtic church, Patrick and Columba and those guys, nearly as much as it does after 597. Okay? Let's see, what else do I have on there? H.R. Ellis Davidson's The Gods and Myths of Northern Europe, which is recommended because it will help get you in the mind frame, the kind of world view of, I don't know if I'd say much of the literature, but at least of some of the literature that we will be reading. The Anglo-Saxons were thoroughly pagan when they were on the continent. That is prior to the migration/invasion, whichever way you want to look at it, of the British Isles. They were 100% card-carrying Germanic pagans, believed in the Germanic pantheon, etc. It took about 150, 200 years for them to become Christians after they arrived. And what I mean by that is they arrive around 450 AD. We'll talk about this in a moment. And St. Augustine of Canterbury comes in 597. So they're there for 150 years before Roman Christianity arrives. And then Roman Christianity spreads pretty quickly. Within about 100 years, most of the island of Great Britain is Christianized. Okay? Some of it had been Christianized earlier, and we'll talk about that some. David Johnson and Elaine Treherne's Readings in Medieval Texts, Interpreting Old and Middle English Literature. That's kind of like the Michael Alexander book, broken up by genre and specific works, specific kinds of works. If I remember right, it's got a few chapters on single works, like Dream of the Rood, I think might be one of them. It's a good one. And then the last one, the Poetic Edda. The Poetic Edda is not English. It's not Anglo-Saxon. It's entirely Old Norse. But again, if you read that, it helps get you into the intellectual atmosphere that informs much of the literature that we will be reading. And when I say much of the literature, I mean much of the poetry. A lot of the prose stuff that we'll be reading won't be as much because, we'll start off with translations, for example, Old English translations of Genesis and a couple of the Gospels and things like that. Preface to Gregory the Great's Pastoral Care, how to be a good priest, essentially. We'll read King Alfred's preface to that, why he wrote it, etc., etc. You take Old English for two reasons. One, to read Old English poetry. Two, to read Beowulf. Right? That's it. In my opinion, that's it. Other people will read it so that they can learn to read Old English, so they can read, the homilies of Alfric, Dr. McDaniels. That's one of her big research areas, or other things like. To me, it's the poetry. It's the Wanderer, the Seafarer, Dream of the Rood, Judith, Battle of Malden, Battle of Brunanburh, and then the creme de la creme, Beowulf. It caps everything. Okay. So, a little bit further down on the syllabus, I'm going to have some suggested readings in, for example, Bede and the Poetic Edda. Okay? And if you read the Poetic Edda, if you've ever read Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, or even Silmarillion, if you then go and read the Poetic Edda, you're going to go, oh, that's where he got, because you're going to see names like Gandalf and Ori, Nori, and Dori, and Glorian, and Gimli. They're all there. Okay, Balin and Bifur and Bofur and he just ripped them right out of Norse literature. Okay, websites. I've given you a couple, and I think I've got links later on in a different part of the content section. Old English Aerobics is a website by Peter Baker, who might be retired now. I don't remember, actually, from University of Virginia. When I originally did the syllabus for you guys, I knew the links were dead, so I had to go back and find them, because the Old English Aerobics used to be hosted at UVA, so it had a UVA extension at the end, but it's no longer there. And that is essentially a set of exercises. And the exercises go along with his book, An Introduction to Old English. But you don't have to have the book. You can do the exercises there. He's got sound files. There's just a ton of stuff. So you might want to take a look at it. Kathy Ball's Old English Pages. This is the first time I've taught this course in 4 years, I think. And even before then, before 4 years ago, I'm trying to remember how long ago it was. Kathy Ball used to have this great, fantastic site at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. And literally going from 1 year when I taught the Old English Beowulf sequence to skipping the following year, and then the next time, it disappeared. It disappeared. She disappeared. I would Google, she didn't show. I literally have no idea what happened to her. She was a linguistics professor, taught Old English, had this fantastic website, which now you can only access via the web archive. And the web archive does have some of the material, and some of the links are still good. And by that I mean the links led to places that are also archived in the web archive, but some of them are dead. Okay, so enough with that. Disclaimer: everything's tentative. We may get way behind early on. We'll see. I've obviously never taught this course via Zoom before, so it might be easier to shut me up via Zoom. You guys can always just shut your screens off and walk away, which you can't do in class. Let's see here, what else? Students with disabilities. I think I've had one student contact me. Attendance isn't really an issue because, it's pretty small. I know if you're not there, you really need to be here. because this kind of class isn't as much me talking as it would be if it were an undergraduate course. This is going to be a lot of you, because every class session you will be reading in Old English and you will be translating your Old English, or excuse me, you'll be translating the Old English assignments into modern English. I paused there because I was trying to decide if I should add some other kind of qualifier. Coherent modern English, let me put it that way. The first few weeks, it probably won't be very coherent. First couple weeks, it's okay if it is strictly literal. Okay, and I'll show you an example of what I mean in a few minutes. But as we go on, your translations ought to start to become a little more graceful, a little more felicitous, etc. I don't expect any of you to be, by the end of the semester, Seamus Haney or anything like that, who famously translated Beowulf in a not very good Beowulf translation, I will say. We'll talk about that later. So be here to participate. Grading, I do have some percentages. When we get to the assignments, you'll see them. Okay. So course objectives. And if you have any questions, you need any clarification, just tell me to stop or chime in. Okay. So course objectives. To learn to read Old English prose and poetry. I mean, that's the biggie. Just to learn to read it. Doesn't mean to read it, sight read it without a dictionary. You probably won't be able to do that you definitely won't be able to, I don't think, by the end of this semester. You might be able to do some by the end of Beowulf. Okay. 2, to become familiar with the major genres of Old English poetry and prose, chronicle, hagiography, charters, in terms of the prose stuff, literature, or in terms of the poetry, elegies, riddles, things like that, heroic poetry, things like that. Okay. To become acquainted with the cultural and historical background of Anglo-Saxon England. We'll do a lot of that just as we talk about the works that we're translating and stuff. It'll all become contextualized essentially every class period, and that's partly what Alexander is for in the Campbell kind of history background book. Okay. Number 4, to read, analyze, understand, and appreciate. That part's going to be up to you, obviously. Various genres of Old English literature. I've had a lot of, maybe not a lot. I've had a few students in the past who have really not liked, for example, reading Saints' Lives. I vary some of the readings every time I teach it. I don't think this time around, I don't think I included any Saints' Lives. No, we don't. We don't have any Saints' Lives this time around. Last time I think I taught it, I did do a couple of Saints' Lives, and a couple of people, didn't care for them for whatever reasons. Number 5, to learn to read aloud Old English poetry and prose, I should say there. Correctly emphasizing the Old English poetic meter, there it is, and prose. The meter's going to be hard. That is getting the accentuation down, because it's not meter like Shakespeare's meter. There's a rhythmic pattern. Okay, the pattern of alliteration, which we'll talk about as we get to poetry. We don't start translating poetry until September 22nd. Well, we've got King Alfred's metrical psalms, or King Alfred Psalms. That's not really poetry like some of the other stuff. September 22nd, we've got the story of Cadman, and that will have Cadman's hymn. So we'll talk a little bit about poetry then, but we don't really get to poetry until October, till October 13th with the Battle of Brunanburg. And then we jump into it. I mean, it's just both feet, deep end, sink or swim kind of a thing. Okay? Lastly, to become familiar with the Anglo-Saxon language as the foundation of modern English. And we'll talk a little bit about that today. I'm going to kind of, depending on what the time is, I might kind of give a brief, or not so brief, background to the Old English linguistic period, let's say. Okay? Any questions so far? No question. Okay. So, here's the biggie. Here are the requirements. I should have printed it out or blown that up on my screen because, man, my eyes are bad. Weekly written summary, 1 page max, 1.5 or double spaced, of a scholarly article and a 5-minute presentation. Okay, so in that summary include the full publication information. Just like underneath your name, just put all that down. Any article, an article on any aspect of Old English language, literature, or culture, and if possible, having something to do with that week's assignment. Okay? And that's one of the really nice things about Marsden's book. Each, just looking at, so for example, next week, we've got Marsden, next week, right? Yeah. Marsden, chapter 13, which is Genesis. I think that's right. Yeah, Genesis. Well, after the introduction, on pages 142 and 43, he has 7 articles and or book titles listed. Okay, so that right there gives you a little jumping off point for trying to find something else, maybe about the Hexateuch. Okay, a couple of those are additions. Some of them are just articles about, the editor, translator, things like that. Okay, so you're going to do that. Each of you will get about 5 minutes, and it'll be a lot easier for me to say, okay, time's done, because I just found out the other day I can mute you. So if you're talking all along, I can just press the button, because it's kind of hard to do that in class sometimes. Let's see. And I'm going to have you post that. I've got to set up a thing in the discussion board. I got to start a topic, essentially. And you'll just post that so that each week everybody will see everybody else's. All right? And one of the things that does is that kind of creates an ongoing bibliography as the course develops. Okay? Number 2, seminar paper plus bibliography. Bibliography / works cited is not included in the page count. Okay, so for you master's students or 6011 students, paper will be 15 to 20 pages. For the doctoral students, it'll be 20 to 30 pages. And it can go over a little bit, not too much. I had one doctoral student several years ago. This paper turned out to be 45 pages. It was a good paper, but it was 45 pages, And I get it the last week of class, and I've got that. And that was a class that had 10 students, and I think it was 6 doctoral and 4 MA. So then I have 5 other doctoral students with 20 to 30 page papers. That wasn't fun reading. Let's see, should be self-explanatory. So the grading, 40, 50% of the grade, something like that for the seminar paper. The weekly written summaries, 10%, something like that. Regular translating, reading aloud in Old English. Yeah, that's going to probably be more than 20% because that's a big part of the class. So you're going to read aloud. It won't, we'll start off just a little bit, but by the time we get to the end of the semester, you'll probably be reading 25, 30 lines at a shot, And every now and then, I'll stop you, I'll ask, okay, now what was that verb? And you'll explain, tense, things like that. Number 4, weekly parsing of Old English texts. Did that show up on the syllabus? Yes, it did. Okay. And you have a sample of that on the syllabus, and I'm going to make a comment about that when we get to it. Okay? What the parsing does is it forces you. It forces you to learn grammatical categories, parts of speech, inflectional endings on nouns, and conjugations of verbs. I mean, it makes you do that. Because most, and by most I mean the vast majority of native English speakers don't understand how language works. Because we're not taught anymore real grammar. And I don't mean we, just your generation. I mean, it's not been taught for 30 or 40 years. I don't know if you had to do this growing up, but we had to in grade school. We had to do sentence diagramming, where you go up on a blackboard, write a sentence out, and then we had to diagram that with the tree, the whole nine. Well, that's essentially what you're doing with parsing. Because what you want to do, when you take a line of verse or a line of prose, you take that line and you identify every word. You identify its part of speech. Not only is it noun, but is it the subject? Is it the object? Is it an indirect or direct object? That kind of thing. If it's a verb, what kind of verb is it? It is a strong verb or a weak verb. There are 7 classes of strong verbs in Old English, and there are 3 different kinds of weak verbs. Which class of strong verb is it? 1 through 7. Okay? And your textbook will give you that information. It gives you all of that information. All right? So you go through and you'll identify that. Once you do that for several weeks, it starts sticking. Okay? So you'll be assigned 5 lines from that day's assignment to parse. This will force you, 1, to learn to use the glossary correctly, which is really, really important. Okay. 2, to learn the noun, adjective, pronoun cases, their endings. Pay attention, learn verb types, conjugations, weak and strong verbs, etc. And then possibly midterm and final exams. Okay. Like I said, I started teaching this course in '95. I essentially taught it every other year, until about 2016, and I've not taught it since then. And I can't remember a semester when I've had a midterm or final exam. Okay, I'm not saying that we won't. I'm just saying I haven't done one yet, because there's usually so much work already involved, and by what you're doing in the class, I can tell whether or not it's sinking in, whether or not you're learning. I mean, if the purpose of an examination is to determine how well the student is learning the material, I'll know that by your translations, if by nothing else. Okay. Question on the assignments. There's also in that last thing, and or other assignments. There might be something else that I'll add. For example, I might add a runic assignment. One of our poems, The Dream of the Rood, survives partially on a stone cross in southwestern Scotland, and it survives in runes, in Viking runic letters. Okay, And there are several other runic monuments that survive from the Anglo-Saxon period. One of them is this thing called the French Casket. And it's a box about, I don't know, 8, 9 inches, maybe 10 inches long, about 4 or 5 inches wide, and maybe 4 or 5 inches tall, made out of whalebone. And it's got runes inscribed on all 4 panels and the top, but it also has this iconography carved into all 4 sides. In the iconography, some of it is Christian iconography, some of it's pagan Germanic iconography. I mean, this thing is totally cool. Some of it's Roman, so you've got the fall of the sacking of Jerusalem, you've got the fall of Rome, and other images. And so I might, give you some examples of runic text, give you the runic alphabet, etc., and say, translate this. Tell me what this passage means, etc. Okay, and I'll put up a bunch of examples and helps and things like that. Okay, any questions so far? None. All right, let's very brief. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, so the only thing that we're supposed to post each week is the written summary of our articles.
Correct.
Okay, and we just read the others.
Yep, the parsing stuff you will send to me. Okay.
Oh, how are we supposed to do that?
Yeah, when I give you the assignment for the parsing, you will write that out, scan it, take a photo of it. I don't care how you do it. If you want to type it out, you can. It'll take a lot longer. The one that I have at the bottom of the syllabus, the very last thing on the syllabus, it took a long time to do all that, to get the words to line up, the whole 9 yards. If you have fairly legible handwriting, I don't have any problem if you handwrite it, scan it, and email it to me. That's fine. Okay. But the only one to be shared with everybody is the summary of an article.
Okay. And you want that posted just any time before class each week, or
yeah.
Yeah.
There's not a certain deadline. Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. So for today, notice, introduction, that's what we're doing now, obviously. Old English pronunciation, we'll do some of that. We won't go through every letter because most of the letters are the same as they are in modern English. Vowels are a little bit different, and some of the letters are different, and I'll talk about some of those in a few moments. I've got, what text do I have on here? I've got the Lord's Prayer in Old English and Cadman's Hymn. We'll probably use those to talk about some things, okay? In terms of pronunciation. Background to Old English studies. We'll do a little bit that's talking about some of those things that I posted. Lord's Prayer, Cadman's Hymn. Wolf and Edwalker is one of the most enigmatic poems in Old English. Nobody knows 100% for sure what it means or even what it's about. It's one of the beauties of it. It has this haunting lyrical beauty to it when you read it in the original, when you hear it, and then when you have it translated, but then you kind of go, okay, now what does that mean though? I mean, etc. So we'll talk about that maybe. Maybe the Marsden I don't even know what I'm talking about when I say the Marsden introduction. What is the Marsden introduction? Yeah, I don't need to talk about the introduction in Marsden at all. You can read that on your own. There's nothing difficult or anything like that. The getting started, beginning Old English on pages 1 through 6 would be good. And then, notice right after that, starting on page 7, even though I don't have this assigned, you've got practice sentences. So you got "The king kom med his ship" right there, and then you get an exact literal translation underneath. So Then he has off to the side, se, with pronunciation. Okay, se, comb, pronounced like comb your hair. Shippe, ship, eh. Okay, giving you kind of a not a phonological, I can't think of the phrase. Yeah, way to pronounce the sounds. We'll talk about that more later. And if you go to, when I pull up the page later, Peter Baker's YouTube, he has audio files of him reading several texts. And if you go to Mike Drout's Old English Aloud, Mike Drout has recorded, I don't think it's everything, but it's almost everything that it survives in Old English. At least I think all the poetry. He's got recordings of all the poetry in Old English. And when we get into the poetry stuff, and if you listen to some of those things and you come to class and you're pronouncing, you're reading and such, I'll probably make some comments about some of those things, because if you listen to Peter Baker's and you listen to Mike Drout's, you're going to go, well, some of those don't sound at all alike. Well, that's because an awful lot of what we are saying the language sounded like is an approximation, because we obviously don't have recordings. What we do have are materials written about Old English from the perspective of the Latin language. And it tells us what Old English sounds like in Latin. And because we have a wealth of information of what Latin sounded like because of Latin grammarians and how they talked about sounds, that gives us, I think I've read where something like, scholars are probably about 70-80% sure that the pronunciations are pretty close. So if we could bring Alfred the Great back up to today and read something that he wrote to him, he'd probably understand it, but he'd kind of say, you sound like somebody from Woodbury talking French. In other words, okay, got a bit of an accent going on there, but, close enough. Don't mean to knock Woodburyans. Okay, and then for, read Campbell the first couple chapters. They're just kind of background things, okay? Then for next week, again, I have the Marsden introduction now. Don't worry about the Marsden introduction. I don't think there's anything real important there. Beginning Old English part's useful. But pages 355 to 96, that is his reference grammar, okay? And what that means is that's his crash course in learning Old English. 41 pages, okay? I'm giving you an even more condensed crash course on the syllabus, just a couple pages down. I think I've got a 2-page, maybe 3-page Old English Grammar, Part 1, Part 2. That is bare bones skeleton of what you need in order to then pick up a text and start reading it, as long as you have a dictionary. Okay? And for the purpose of Marsden, your glossary is your dictionary. If you get the J.R. Clark Hall, then you could pick up any Old English text and very slowly make your way through it. Okay? So next week, Marsden we'll talk some about the reference grammar, and then chapter 13, which is about spreading the word or something like that. Yeah, it's titled Spreading the Word. It's about biblical translation stuff. And so you've got an introduction there. Wherever you have that symbol and a number, always read the introduction, okay, as well as the specific assigned reading. So the specific assigned reading and translation is Genesis 8, 6 through 18, which is this, after the flood. And then 9... 9, Oh, it's the same passage from the Old English Accusative. And then I have you jump back. Why? Well, some of you, let me rephrase this. It used to be safe to assume, it's not as much today, that most students had at least, if they hadn't read the story of the flood, they'd heard of the story of the flood, Noah's flood. And that's what that passage in Genesis is. It's just, after the flood, sends the dove out, dove comes back, does it again, etc. It's that passage, okay? Then, because you're already kind of culturally familiar with that story, so it shouldn't be as hard to translate, and because you can probably find a copy of the Bible somewhere to look, then I take you back to the very first thing. Chapter 1, in the schoolroom, and this is from Alfred's Colloquy. Alfred's Colloquy was a book written to help students learn how to read Old English, which is exactly what you are. Okay? So it begins in the schoolroom, and it begins, page 42, We children biddeth they, eala laru, that is, we children ask you, eala, it's kind of like low, exalted, highly favored one, Lerao, teacher, okay? Fathu tacha us sprechen, that you teach us how to speak. He doesn't have the who there, okay? Fortham, because unyalarida, unlearned. We sinden we are, and unyaramidlicha we spreketh. And we don't speak none too good, is essentially what they're saying. Okay? So, that's how it starts. And he goes through, Alfred does, and what do you do? That is, what line of work are you in? What does your father do? And we find out, people are shepherds, and people are bakers, and people are ditch diggers, and we find out the kind of work people did, and it's just kind of basic. If you've ever took a foreign language, if it was a kind of an intensive, immersive course, one of the things instructors will do in that, depending on some of them, I've had one or two actually where the instructor never spoke a word of English the entire course. And they come in and ask, and it took a while for the students to kind of get the idea, and the student would point to something, this thing, and the teacher would say what it was, and then the student would recite it and like, yeah, you got it, and learn a foreign language that way. Well, that's kind of what Alfric is doing a little bit there, okay? And then Alexander 1 and 2, that's kind of background. Perspectives, what survives, songs and scribes, the end of heathenism, languages of Britain, contexts, and then an overview, historical overview, which is also the first couple of chapters in Campbell, okay? So you don't have you've got in the Alfric, you've got about 72, 73 lines, okay, to translate for next week. But notice, half of those lines are short because they're simple questions. So it's really more like almost half that amount, okay? And again, I'm not expecting you to come in next week with this beautifully fluent, wonderful translation. I expect it to be choppy, all right? Same with the Genesis passage, okay? Following week, because we don't get Labor Day, following week we'll jump into the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle and the Old English Gospels, okay? Passage from Matthew, which I think that is Parable of the Prodigal Son. So if you want to refresh your memory, go dig that up. And then passage from King Alfred's translation of some of the Psalms, 1, 12, and 22. So again, it's not terribly long. I think the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle there will probably be the more difficult of the material, even though it shows up early in the book. And the way he's organized the book, the easier stuff comes at the beginning, the harder stuff obviously then goes at the end. So he's got where is it? Okay, so this is from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle, relatively late in the Anglo-Saxon period, from when England starts being attacked by the Vikings. So you've got like 83 lines. Okay. You'll also notice if you look at the book, early on, you got a lot of glosses on the bottom of the page. As you go later on in the semester, you start to see fewer glosses. I mean, you might have more notes, but you'll have fewer glosses because you are learning the language. And so he's not having to gloss words as frequently. All right. Then the week after that, Alfred's preface to the Pastoral Care, which is quite a bit longer than anything else we will have done up to that point. It's pretty straightforward. Alfred is a pretty easy writer to translate. He's fairly straightforward. Okay, and that's pretty much his preface is why he wanted the Pastoral Care translated. He sees things going on in England that need attention. And so I'm sending off this book to the bishops to get their priests in order, kind of a thing, to help get things right. Okay. Let's see. And then the week after that, Bede's Story of Cadman, which we'll talk maybe a little bit about in a few minutes when we talk about Cadman. Week after that, Sermo Lupi ad Anglos, that's the Sermon of the Wolf to the English, written around 1014 during Viking invasions, and it's about the end of the world. And we got it coming to us. God is visiting hell and damnation upon us because we have sinned and fallen away from him, and we've done all these horrible things. He's not saying, he is to an extent, he's not saying the Vikings are doing all this horrible stuff. He's saying the Vikings are doing this horrible stuff because we've been horrible to ourselves. We've started selling each other, for example, one of the things he mentions, we started selling each other into slavery. That's a no-no. He's a bishop, by the way, writing this, okay? Week after that, probably the hardest thing you'll translate all semester. Not very long, about 50, 55 lines, I think. Might be more. It's from the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle again, Kinewulf and Kinehard. And I'll just tell you right now, the reason it is so hard to translate is you've got names mentioned maybe 3 or 4 times, and then every other referent to those names are pronouns. And so you're trying to figure out, who does the pronoun refer to? Is it going back to this person? Is it going back to that person? Because it's seldom clear. Okay, this is the passage that has students often pulling their hair out. And then it gets a little easier after that. And then we get into real poetry. Battle of Brunanburh, which is about a historical battle. Dior, which is this little short lyric. It's very unique in Anglo-Saxon literature because it has a refrain. I think it's the only poem in all of Old English poetry that has a refrain. Okay, which we'll talk about when we get to it. Genesis B on October 20th. Might have influenced John Milton in his Paradise Lost, because it's in Genesis B when we hear Satan rouse his troops, And it is eerily similar to the speech that Satan gives in, Book 3 of Paradise Lost, when he rouses the troops off the fiery lake. It's the part that made, William Blake say that Milton was, secretly of the party of Satan. And the reason I say, it might have influenced Milton is because Milton was very good friends with the person who owned this manuscript. A guy by the name of Franciscus Junius. And Milton knew Old English. We know that. You can read Milton's notebooks and where he talks about, ideas that he has for, various things to write about, little things like history of the world, history of the universe, things like that. And some Old English figures in there. Okay. After Genesis B, we get to one of the most beautiful poems, I would say, in all of the English language, Dream of the Rood. Kaylee, didn't you have me for 3010? Britlet 1? Or did you have me for Shakespeare?
I actually just had you for Tolkien.
Oh, you had me for the Tolkien ruling. Okay. So Dream of the Rood is a cross. It's not the dream that the cross has. It's a dream a guy has about the cross, where the cross of Christ speaks to him, comes to him in a dream. Dream visions are really important throughout late classical and throughout medieval literature. So we'll talk about that when we get to it. And it's got this wonderful division into kind of 3 sections, dealing with the past, dealing with now, dealing with the future, etc. Then The Seafarer, another beautiful poem, Battle of Malden, about a historical event that the English lost against some Vikings, which has probably the greatest expression of the Anglo-Saxon heroic ethos at the very end when everybody's about to die. It's kind of we're all going to die, but we got to hold together and be stronger and, have great courage as we get wiped out. And then The Wanderer, which I think probably is the most beautiful. It's definitely, in my opinion at least, it's definitely the most beautiful poem in Old English poetry. And that's because of the sentiment that it expresses. I mean, in one sense, it is the bleakest thing you will ever read. I mean, 20th century realism has nothing on this. In fact, I had a student several years ago. Man, this was 10, 15 years ago at least. Former soldier, who made it to, we were doing The Wanderer a little bit earlier in the semester, and he made it to that class. He suffered from PTSD, and that class was the last day I saw him, because I got an email and said it triggered. It was too much, because, I mean, you have a guy, the reason he's a wanderer, because he's the last of his people. Everybody else has been killed. And so he's looking for a new Lord. And this guy was like, been there, done that. And I can't handle discussing it and such. So The Wanderer, it does end on a positive note. Now, some people think the positive note it ends on is added later. That it's not integral to the original poem. I think they're completely wrong. We'll talk about that then. So we'll end with The Wanderer. I take that back. And then I have 2 days where I have the same thing. Wolf and Edwalker and The Wife's Lament. Okay, Wolf and Edwalker, which I already mentioned, the most enigmatic poem. Well, The Wife's Lament is right up there, maybe just beneath it. It's called The Wife's Lament. It's also called The Wife's Complaint. Nobody is 100% sure what the story is in that poem either. There's one guy, pretty well-known Old English literary critic who's written quite a bit, who argues that the speaker is actually a ghost. And I'm kind of what? Are you crazy? You know, but it's very pagan. I mean, it is almost thoroughly pagan. In most of the other stuff, there's Christian elements and things. This one in Wolf and Edwalker, hard. Wolf and Edwalker, none. Wife's Lament, you might be able to stretch for one, but you've got oak trees, you've got a cave, you got a woman being secluded in the cave, being separated from her lover by her family. I mean, all kinds of things going on, okay? And then notice I also have presentations. And that's because if you go back up, under point 5 of the assignments, I say possible midterm final exams and or other assignments, doctoral students may have to do presentations on appointed topics days, okay? You probably will, I'll just throw that out right now, but those presentations will be on your papers, on your seminar papers, okay? They won't be like a full conference presentation because we don't have time. There's 6 of you. If you did 20 minutes each, actually we would have time for that. You could do that. You could write your paper and then kind of cut it down for like a conference presentation. And this would be a good kind of format for doing that. I have to think about that more. And then the final, the day assigned for the final, December 8th, will be the last day of class, which if we've gotten behind, you know, we'll push things back to then, or we'll have presentations, etc. Okay, or we'll have an exam. We'll see how the semester goes. Questions? And if you need to get up and leave, get water, use the restroom, whatever, feel free to.
This isn't necessarily a question, but in the version of March that I have, the reference grammar actually starts on page 409.
409. I'm wondering if you've got 409?
Yes. It's when the
I've got the same version.
Yeah. This is the one that the bookstore.
Okay, that is. Let me just make sure. That's Richard Marsden, the Cambridge Old English Reader.
Yes.
Oh, yep. That's my fault. That's because that number in there, that's from an old syllabus. I didn't update it. Yep, that's right. It's 409.
Okay.
That is the second edition.
For a second, I was like, I'm pretty sure this is that.
No, it's the right one. Yeah.
Okay.
Which means, I don't remember if I used page numbers anywhere else. I don't think I did. I used chapter numbers. Yeah, so that shouldn't be a problem, but shoot. I've got to make sure, for example, 38, 39, 40, Wanderer, Life Cement, 38, that's the same. See, and there's stuff I didn't include this time, you know, and we might find a way, like riddles. There's like 90 riddles that survive in the Exeter manuscript. And riddles were really important to Anglo-Saxons. And one of the things the riddles are fun to do, one of the reasons they're fun to do, is because you have very detailed riddles, and then you have some that aren't very detailed, but they are just obscene, and they're obscene because of what we put into them. When you get the definition of the riddle, you're like, oh. Meanwhile, I thought it was something else, and many of them haven't been solved. So you look at them and go, I don't know what it means. I can translate, but I don't know what it's referring to. What are my dogs barking at? Dogs, quiet. Okay, other questions or comments? All right, so after that, and we're not going to go through all this, I've given you the suggested readings in Bede's Ecclesiastical History and the readings in the Poetic Edda. Make sure that's still recording. It is. And then you have the Old English Grammar 1 and Old English Grammar 2. Okay? These aren't necessarily, see, that's the problem. Your page numbers in the grammar are going to be off. So, the grammar, not going to be page 409. It's going to be, oh, or maybe it is. No, the grammar's right. Well, that's odd. Okay, so the grammar in the Old English Grammar Part 1, where the first point pronouns, where I say Marsden A, pages 409 to 414, that is correct to the second edition. So, what you have there, and you're going to see, I've given you a another version of this by Peter Baker, also, is these are essentially paradigms. These are models, okay, for the language. And what would best serve you would be to pull out a index card and write these down on it. I'll just tell you what I did when I did this 30 years ago? Yeah, 30 years ago. I took, for example, the paradigm for the demonstrative pronoun. The, that, those. Okay? And I copied that information on an index card. And I carried that index card with me everywhere I went. So that if I was in line somewhere, I would pull that thing out and I would look at it from the top left and just go, se thona thas tham tham, thi thon. Go down the line. Masculine, singular, nominative, accusative, genitive, dative, plural. Masculine, singular, nominative, subject case, se. Accusative, thona. There are no silent final syllables at all in Old English. There are no silent letters. Every letter is pronounced. Okay? So, thona, genitive, fess. The AE digraph, it's the sound that you have in cat, fat, mat. It's the a. Okay? Dative, indirect object, tham, thumb. Okay? Instrumental, thi, thon. Thon. And then neuter. And sometimes I would have one written out with just the masculine, and another card with the neuter, and another card with the feminine. So neuter, fat, fess, tham, thumb, thi, thon. If you look at the neuter and look at the masculine, notice there are some pretty strong similarities. For example, the dative for both, the genitive is the same for the neuter and the masculine, and the dative is the same, and the instrumental is the same. So it makes it a little less hard to memorize. But then you have the feminine case, or the feminine gender, and it messes things up because they're quite a bit different. Okay? And talking about masculine, neuter, feminine, this is not what's called natural gender. This is analytical gender. And the terminology comes from Jacob Grimm, philologist in the 18th century. He just needed categories for understanding language. Okay? And it goes back longer than Grimm, but he, masculine, feminine, neuter, well, that's a nice tripartite, and there are 3 different kinds, so it fit. So the se, the that, the sel, and the thaw, those are all, or they can be translated the or that. The plural thaw becomes those. Notice we don't have a plural form of the in modern English. You don't say those. Okay? But we do say those and these. Okay? There's a different one for these, which we'll talk about later. So, you drill these into your mind. I know 20th century we're supposed to be against rote memory. Rote memory is where learning Old English is at. You got to drill it in. Okay, I still have a stack of note cards, probably, I don't know, 500 thick from when I took Latin as a doctoral student. Introductory Latin, final 2 years of my PhD, and I just wrote these things wherever I went. I had them with me. So you can either go down the line or down the cases: nominative, subject, accusative, direct object, genitive, possessive, dative, indirect object, instrumental. We don't have anymore. It's one of those cases that has dropped out. Okay, instrumental is when you do something with something else. I hit the nail with the hammer. With the hammer in Old English would be in the instrumental case. It would have an instrumental ending on it, which we can look at briefly. So this is stuff you just need to, the Old English Grammar Part 1 and 2, let me rephrase that. Part 1, just Part 1, read. So just commit this thing to memory, all right? Because we'll do a quiz next week. And the quiz will look like this. If you look at what's on the page right now, just take some of those out. So, for example, the paradigm for the demonstrative. It might have se, but thona might be missing. And you'll just fill in the blank. Okay? So, endings for strong masculine and neuter nouns. Well, why do they have endings? Because we don't have endings in modern English. Right? If we want to make the word boy the subject of a sentence, how do we make it the subject of a sentence? Anybody? See? This is exactly. It's the first thing in the sentence. Okay? It becomes the first thing in the sentence. In Old English, it doesn't have to. In Old English, the subject can come at the end of the sentence. Why? The inflectional ending carries all the grammatical meaning. See, all these inflections will die off by the end of the Middle Ages. That is, by the time you get to the beginning of the 16th century, all these inflections are gone. It's why we still have a lot of silent E's on words. Those silent E's, they're fossils. They are fossils just as much as a bone in the ground from 600 million years ago is a fossil. They are indicators of something that used to be there. And by the way, what grammar school teachers and even high school teachers I think do tell students about final E's, that final E's are there to make the vowel that comes before them long. That's a lie. That is just a lie. The final E has nothing to do with the length of the vowel that comes before the consonant, before the final E. The final E is just there because the rest of the ending has dropped off. And we just, in the Middle Ages, period roughly from about 1000 to 1400, it began to drop off until it finally was no longer pronounced. When you read Chaucer, there are times when you need to pronounce final E's, and there are times when you don't pronounce final E's. It all depends upon the meter of the particular line, which can make Chaucer reading difficult sometimes. In Old English, as I said, there are no silent letters at all. So when you have a word like, go down to 2, the endings for strong masculine nouns, go down to the dative instrumental, the word there, stane. Stane. It's an e. It's not a, and it's not schwa. It's not stan u. Okay? Schwa is the default sound in the mouth. Somebody gives up to give a speech, and what do if they lose their train of thought or lose their place? You open the mouth, and that's what comes out. Okay? It's not that. It's eh. like the sound in pet. Okay. So then you have the endings for strong masculine and neuter nouns. All right. So like ston, stone, and ship. Those are masculine and neuter. Ston is masculine. Ship is neuter. Okay. So why is this important? Because when you take, if you're looking at the screen, if you can see my cursor moving, if you take one of these demonstratives or definite articles and put it with one of these, okay, they have to agree. Right? Modern English, same thing applies. Adjectives have got to agree with the nouns they modify, right? You wouldn't say these fast horse. These, plural, horse, singular. It's got to be these horses. Okay? Notice we don't do anything with fast there, with that adjective any longer. There are some instances where we will modify the adjectives also. But in Old English, because it's an inflected language, nouns and adjectives, nouns and pronouns have got to agree in case, number, and gender. Case, they're part of speech. Subject, object, direct or indirect object. Genitive, instrumental case. Okay, so they have to agree on that. They have to agree with gender. So you wouldn't say, for example, sail ship. Why? Sail's feminine. Ship.
So it's like Spanish a little bit, right?
It's like
Spanish?
Yes, it's definitely. It's pick a European language. It's like the European languages, Spanish included. Okay. If you ever had German, this will be a breeze. Because this is just Old English is German. It's an earlier form of modern German. Okay. Old English comes from Anglo-Saxon. Anglo-Saxon is Northern Germanic languages. Modern German developed more out of the Southern Germanic languages, the High Germanic languages. High there meaning altitude, the Alps. Okay. Low German is altitude. That's Northern Germany down up near the Baltic Sea and such. Okay. So they've got to, everything's got to agree. Case, number, and gender. So the number, whether it's singular or plural, has to agree. So you wouldn't say thaw, plural, ship. You'd say thaw, shipu. You wouldn't say thaw, stun. You'd say thaw, stun us. All right? Now, notice, because this is a modern English kind of thing, talking about the difference between Old English and Modern English. Notice in all of these, except for the feminine, but notice in the masculine, the neuter, and then the genitive, masculine, neuter, notice the endings. S. How do we make possessive case in modern English?
Apostrophe S.
We put an apostrophe S.
Yeah.
Why?
The place of the E.
Why do we put an apostrophe?
Takes the place of the E.
No. Good guess. What one word in the English language do we not put an apostrophe when we're indicating possession? There's one word. It's. It's. People have all kinds of problems. They put it's with an apostrophe when they mean it's possessive. They put it's without an apostrophe when they mean it is. Okay? The apostrophe is an error that comes in during the Elizabethan period. And it's because they think that the S there, or the apostrophe S, is an elided form of the word that's doing the possessing, and the next word, his, the pronoun his, and then the following word, the thing that's being possessed. For example, Shakespeare has in one of the plays, Mars his sword. But it's not pronounced, it's Romeo and Juliet, I think. It's not pronounced Mars his sword. It's pronounced Mars's sword. So in the pronunciation, the H is elided off. Well, when you hear that, how do you represent that in writing? Well, you represent that elision with an apostrophe. You're taking something out. That's where the apostrophe form of possessive comes into the written form of the English language. It was never used prior to 1500 at the earliest. I don't even think it was 1500. I think it's 1550 or so. Okay, just a little bit of history of the English language there. So, memorize this stuff. And then notice at the end, before grammar part 2, I say, okay, now taking that information just from those 3 parts, all right, taking that information, practice combining the nouns with the articles or demonstratives above. So, here's a noun. ENGL means angel. Okay? It's masculine. So if you take that noun, ENGL, it's masculine, and you come up here, endings for strong masculine neuter nouns. So nominative, accusative, what kind of ending would it have? Just masculine. None. It doesn't take an ending. ENGL is its nominative, its subject form. If you want to make it possessive, genitive, then it becomes what? ENGL-less. ENGL-less. Angeles. Los Angeles. I mean, that's what it is. Okay? So, if it's dative or instrumental, ENGL-le. So you take that noun and you're just practicing putting these endings on, and then you can go through and you can, if you want to make it subject, se, engel. Accusative, thona, but remember, it doesn't add another ending again, so it's thona engel if it's in the accusative case. If it's receiving the action, okay? Genitive.
If it's receiving the action, it's what?
If it's accusative, okay? So if it's accusative, thona engel. If it's genitive, thas engel s, because you put that genitive ending on. If it's dative, pick one. Doesn't matter. Either of them work. Tham or tham. And what's the ending? Engela. So what learning these endings and the forms of these demonstratives and definite articles does is it makes it easier for you as you start reading to translate. For example, when you see a final E on a word, well, if you look at the masculine and neuter and the feminine, just combine them all together, how many of those end with an E? Well, dative and instrumental, genitive, and dative and instrumental. So if you find a word that has an E on the end, the odds are it's going to be a dative or instrumental, possibly a genitive. So what does that mean? How do you translate genitive? Let's say it's ENGL. If translating that in modern English, how are you going to translate that? There's 2 ways. The angels, right? The angel apostrophe S, historically inaccurate, but we'll go with it. Or of the angel. Like the wings of the angel. The voice of the angel. Okay? So wings and voice there would be the nominative, would be the subject. You know, the wings of the angel were beautiful. Wings would be subject, nominative. Of the angel would be genitive. Were beautiful, okay? It's going to be modifying the wings. It's going to be a nominative complement, all right? So that's what I'm suggesting, go up, that you do down here. Take the demonstratives or the definite articles and add them to the nouns, keeping the right cases, okay? Just practice. And that's some of what Marsden does in those early sentences that are before the actual translation starts. So I've given you, what, 1, 2, 3, looks like 3 masculine nouns, 3 neuter nouns, and 4 feminine nouns. So with the 3 masculine nouns, you take that masculine article or demonstrative here, you look at the ending, and you just, take a sheet of paper and say Beorn and write Beorn. I would do it this way. I would write 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different Beorns. Okay? Next to it, Se for the first one, Thona for the second one, Thas for the next one, Tham, Thom for the next one, Thi, Thon for the next one. Okay? Notice we haven't put any endings on Beorn yet. It's just Beorn. You've got those now in front of them. Nominative, accusative, genitive, dative, instrumental. Then go through looking at this part of the chart and say, okay, nominative, Beorn. It doesn't take an ending. So it's fine how it is. Se Beorn, the boy, the warrior. Bairn can sometimes mean boy. It's where Scottish bairn comes from. Okay? So then you go down, accusative. Okay, so accusative. Shoot, accusative doesn't take an ending either. So that means when you come across some words in Old English, notice if they're masculine and they're nominative or accusative, you can't tell which one is which. You can't tell if it's the subject of the sentence or it's receiving the action of the sentence. So what's going to tell you which it is? The context. How everything else in the sentence will work. Okay? So then you just keep going down. Genitive. Now there's a difference. So we've already seen Thas. Notice the ending there in that word matches the S ending of the genitive. So Thas, Bearnes. Okay? Dative and instrumental. Dative, Tham, Thom, Bearne. Instrumental, Thon, Bearne. And then you go through and do the same thing with dome. That's why you often see dome with an E. Dome. Dative. Instrumental. Okay? And then do the same thing with the feminine forms. Luvu, which I didn't include Luvu in there. Bot. Rared. Okay? Faru. So, then you have this. You'll need to know the grammatical difference between weak and strong adjectives. Look at section C2, C3 in the reference grammar. It discusses that, and we'll discuss it some next week. Lastly, you want to understand somewhat the phonological principles, and we'll discuss this. You can read about it. And I would say, when you're reading the reference grammar, when you have questions, write them down. If you want, I need to start a discussion thing. But when you want, post it to the discussion board. Hey, Dr. Sherman, I'm reading this and I don't understand this. Or, hey, anybody, I'm reading this, I don't understand this. Anybody else understand this? And I'll usually, if I see it, I'll wait a while, give somebody else, I want you guys to chip in to try to answer each other's questions, and then I'll try to respond, okay? Don't worry about read this part, the grammar part 2, but there won't be a quiz on it next week. The quiz for next week will just be over the Old English Grammar Part 1. All right? It won't be major. It's not a grade breaker. It's not anything to stress or lose a lot of sleep over. Maybe you lose a little sleep, but, not a lot. Have a couple beers and, which, I shouldn't say this, but you're at home. If you want to pop a brew while it's fine with me. Okay, so let's go over that. The grammar 2 part, and we're going to take a break in just a minute we won't normally take a break unless I'm the only one home and I have to feed my dogs, because I'm going to have to go feed them or they're going to come eat me. Let's see here. The grammar part 2 is almost or entirely. No, it's entirely about verbs. Okay? You'll have some verbs to deal with for the translations next week, but they'll almost all be glossed. But what it does is it goes into the 7 different classes, and we'll talk about why there are different classes and how you know there are different classes. This is another thing, index cards. I would write these down, and I would just memorize these going left to right. For example, the class 1, over here on the left, class 1 strong verb, and by strong verb we mean a verb that to form the past tense, the vowel changes. Modern English, those are called what? I think those are called irregular verbs. Modern English regular verbs are verbs that take what's called a dental suffix, a T or D ending, walk, walked, okay? Strong verbs change the vowel, swim, swam, swum. Not, thank God at least not yet, swimmed. We do see much more today, pleaded,
Headed.
though plead is a strong verb, it's pled, okay? And it's spelled P-L-E-A-D, just like plead is. Lead and led are different. Led is L-E-D. The L-E-A-D, as in I led my dog somewhere, the L-E-A-D is the medal, or present tense, okay? So you've got the 7 classes and such, and I'll talk about ablaut and all that kind of stuff next week. So let's take about a 5-minute break. I'm going to, where is turn off sharing? I don't see it. Nope, it's class. There it is. Stop share. I'm going to stop the video briefly, go feed my dogs, and I'll be right back in like 5 minutes. All right. And pause that. Yes, I know. All right, I am back. I don't know who else is back. So, any questions so far? I know that's been a lot. Okay, let me, just trying to decide. Let me go back to sharing the screen. It's 4:25. We've got an hour and 15 minutes if we do the full class. So let me go back and share this. How many have any of you heard any Old English before? Taken anything where you've studied Old English before? What have you done before, Sarah? You got there you go.
Oh gosh, yeah, there we go. Oh gosh. It's been a couple of years because this was in my master's program.
Okay.
But I've done a lot. And like the stuff that you went over, it was very familiar. So that's good.
Okay. Well, just to give you an idea of the sounds, if you've not heard it before, I think this link is good. I didn't check it. Here's the Lord's Prayer, the Paternoster in Old English. This is from the version given in Matthew 6, 9 through 13. Fader ure, thuthe ert on heavenum, si the nama je helgod, to bekommet in rike, je worden din wille on erdan, swa on heavenum, erne jadai hwamlichen hlaf, sile us to die, and forgive us ur jiltas, swa we forgiveth urem jiltendum, and ne jelad to us on kostnena, ak elus us of uvele, sodliche. Now, I'm going to do it again, and tell me if you can pick out the difference between the first one and the second one, because I'm going to do a couple of sounds pretty differently. I'm going to try to remember to do them differently. Fader ure, thuthe art on heavenum, sit din namme je helgod, to bekommet din rike, je worden din wille on erdan, swa on heavenum, erne je die hwamlichen hlaf, sile us to die, and forgive us ur giltas, swa we forgiveth urem geltendum, and ne jelad to us on kostnena, ak elus us of uvele, sodliche. Anybody notice where the difference was? Right?
Was it in Father or the pronunciation of the A?
It wasn't supposed to be. I might have,
Okay.
If I do it 5 different times, the pronunciations will vary just slightly. It was down in the final lines with forgive versus forgive, in giltas versus yiltas, and again, forgivath versus forgivath, and gilten versus yilten. And that's because G has 3 different pronunciation values. It's got the hard G. It's got ya. Okay, like yeah, but ya. Okay, when it's got an E following it. And then it's got one that we don't have very much in modern English. You have it in German with verbs like sagen. Okay. So the way you learn it in Marsden discusses this, and I think I've got something somewhere, either in the syllabus or somewhere to be uploaded. When the G comes before a front vowel, like an E or an I, it is usually the y sound, Okay? When it comes in a prefix at the beginning of a word, like right here with the yahalgod, okay? That prefix right there, that's always yeah. Whenever you see that followed by a word, it's yeah. It's an intensifier, okay? So yahalgod. And even that G there, sometimes it'll be hard, like I said, yahalgo. Sometimes it's yahalgu, yeah, because that's what becomes hallowed. It's the same G sound, for example, in the Old English word for the modern English kind of bird that lives on ponds and streams and goes quack, quack. We call them ducks, but what kind of water animal? They're fowl. Okay. Well, the Old English word for that is fugol. F-U-G-O-L. Fugol. Well, that G becomes fugol, fool, fool, and it drops off. And vowel change occurs in the late Middle Ages, early Renaissance period, what's called the Great Vowel Shift, and it becomes foul. Okay? So, Fer ure thuthe art anheavenum, sithi nama yahelgod, to becomet in riche, je worthe din wille on earthen, swa on heavenum, erne jedai hwamlichen hlaf, sulle us to die, and forgive us, I meant to do that one hard, and forgive us ure giltas, swa we forgiveth urem giltendum, and ne jelad to us on kostninga, ac elus us of evile, sodlige. Now, if you translate that literally, and I think I went back through for this version of the syllabus and pretty much did that. Father, our, thou, which becomes you at the end of the Middle Ages, early Renaissance period, you who are in, and this is plural, in the heavens. Whenever you have a um, almost 100% of the time, it's dative plural. So when you see on the end of a word, immediately assume dative plural. Dative, indirect object. Translate datives with to, with, or for. Okay? To the heavens, with the heavens, for the heavens, in the heavens, when it follows a preposition. Okay? So, see is a form of the verb be. Be thine. Name, be your name, yahalgod, hallowed. To become just means may it happen or come, your kingdom, thy kingdom, your worthe, may it be done, thy will, and on earth, swa, as or just as, if you want, in heavenum, or in the heavens. Erna, and then this is a big long word that doesn't really mean daily. It's really weird. Huam kind of means like whom or which. Day does. So this is day which like the day. And interestingly, in the Greek, I've got a series of tapes by a Greek priest on the Lord's Prayer, and he talks about this word in the Greek. It's epiousios. Ousios means of the day. Epi means above. Like an epigram is the gram, the writing, above the writing. Usually, the beginning of a book, you get an epigram sometimes at the beginning. It's meant to kind of give you a lead way into the book, etc. Well, the epiousios is above the day, over the day. Well, this is kind of like the same thing. Okay? Hlaf. What word is that? Modern English.
Bread.
Close.
I think.
Loaf.
No bread? Oh, yeah.
It's loaf.
Okay. I do that every time.
Okay. Between Old English, and I'll talk about this next week because we're running short on time. Between Old English and today, all the vowels change. I'll post on the website. Think of the vowels as forming essentially a triangle. Okay? And on the triangle, so if you look, trying to see, if you look where my hands are, that won't work. Sheet of paper. I'm not doing all of them, I'm just doing 3 of the vowels. I don't know how well you can see that, if at all. Up here you have the letter I, okay? But the pronunciation value, and it goes down like this, okay? You have the letter I, but the pronunciation value is E. It's like the I in the word machine, okay? It's what's called a high front vowel, because it's made high in the mouth, with the tongue at the front of the mouth, okay? And then you have other vowels between E, and then you come down here to the bottom, and you have aw. And this is like the aw in father, okay, or park. And there's some variation because of how people have variant pronunciations and such. And this is a low mid vowel. If you just say the vowel aw, notice your mouth's open and your tongue's kind of down flat. E, your tongue raises up, your mouth is tense, okay? So E, aw, and then up here in the upper other part of the leg, it's ooh, ooh. So your mouth gets rounded. So this is what's called a high back vowel. So it's the tongue's kind of up in the back of the mouth, okay? So those are all long vowels. E, ah, oo. The others are A, represented by the letter E. I don't know how well you can see that. Oh, I'm going all weird, aren't I? E, like the A in cafe sound, okay? And then you have, nope, got those backwards. Nope, that's right. O and aw, the aw sound like in saw, S-A-W, or the same kind of sound in caught. Notice I really accentuated that, caught, not my normal pronunciation, caught. Caught, C-A-U-G-H-T, sounds like C-O-T, okay? The sound in the name Faulkner, it's different than the sound in road, okay? Those are all long vowels. E, I, A, ah, aw, o, oo. Those are all long vowels. Those all change from the period from 1100 to 1600. And we don't know why. Every one of them changes. They all move. If you have that vowel triangle, and we'll have it for next week, you know, those on this side of my thing, they all move up this way. Those on this side, they all move up this way. And the ones that are at the top go in and go in. So E, Old English E, becomes Modern English I. Okay? So down here, ah. Well, think of that word that we had just earlier. Back here. Stun means stone. I just gave it away. It jumps and it becomes O. Go to Scotland today. If you want to go to somebody's house, you go to their hame, their home. Okay? Same thing applies. So when we talk about some of these vowels, for example, with the Lord's Prayer, got to keep in mind there are some big changes going on. Swa, there's a perfect example right there. So. That's what that literally means. Okay? Forgive us, ure. What is that in modern English? It's right there. Our. Oo was on the top corner of that vowel triangle over here. Well, the only way it can go any higher is to become a diphthong. A diphthong is where you have two sounds. The first one starts being made, and then the mouth slides to the other one. Okay? Ow, ow, hour, hour. Okay? So that's the Lord's Prayer. Okay? Let's do briefly Cadman's hymn. Nu schulen herian heaven reaches word, meh todes machta und es modjethank. Now notice what I'm doing there. I'm not just reading it like I did, Vader ure thute art on heavenum, site nama Yahalgod. Why? That's not poetry. Nu schulen herian heaven reaches word, meh todes machta und es modjethank. That's poetry. And it's poetry governed by what? What can you tell? Maybe not as much in line 1, but line 2. What stands out? Meh todes machta modjethank. Alliteration. The alliteration is not like alliteration that you'll read in modern English, literature textbooks, where it says any consonant, consonants alliterate, C with C, etc., etc. It's not necessarily that. The alliteration has to occur where there is stress. Okay? In Old English verse, and we'll talk about this more later, in Old English verse, you've got 4 stresses in every line. 2 in the first half line and 2 in the second half line. So if you look at that second line, meh todes machta und es modjethank, well, you've got meh tod des, 3 syllables, machta, 2 syllables, und his modjethank, 5 syllables again. So how do you know where the stress is? This is where it gets really confusing. In Germanic languages, the stress is determined, or let me rephrase that. The alliteration is determined by the first stressed syllable of the second half line of a line of poetry. So you don't look at the first half line, you look at the second half line. Okay? Conjunctions are never stressed. Why? They're useless words. You can pick up a novel and you can read the novel perfectly fine if you take all the conjunctions out. Okay? Pronouns. Not very important. They don't tend to be stressed. Words that tend to be stressed are nouns, verbs, adjectives, then pronouns and adverbs. But pretty much nouns and verbs. Okay? So that's the first stress right there. M. But it's not just the sound m, it's the full syllable. Mod. Okay? So then you look at that and go, okay, now what does that alliterate with? Well, that's pretty easy with this line, because you have 2 words in the first half line that both begin with m. So that's where the alliteration is. That's also telling you this syllable, mel, notice that's a diphthong. It's 1 syllable, but 2 sounds. L. Okay? Mel, ma. So then you have what's called secondary stress here, or where these 2 are resolved. Meh todes machta und his, not important, modjethank. Okay? And the final stress is on the th sound there, the final syllable. Badger! Stop it! The other dog's probably trying to eat his food. And we'll go into this quite a bit because this gets really important. Because the meter can also help determine meaning, because it can emphasize certain things over other things. So, nu schulen herian heaven reaches where meh todes machta und es modjethank, werk wuldervader, swahe wundrige was, eche drichten or anstelde, he erst schop den bernum, heaven torova heilig schippend, tha midnyard mankinnes word, Echtgedrichten Aftertelde, Firmfoldan Freya Allmächtig. Now notice in that one, you have this phrase, Echtgedrichten, entirely repeated. Could he not think up something else to put here? Probably it's because it's a formula. You'll see that phrase, Echtgedrichten, in other places. Okay? It just means eternal God or eternal Lord. And we'll see as we talk about other poetry, especially for those of you going to Beowulf, formulaic poetry becomes very, very important in terms of how the poetry is composed and such later on. Okay, what else? Let's see. Click there. So you have Old English orthography. So you have the letter forms. Hold on just 1 second.
Hi, lady.
Hi. Think you can hear me?
Oh, Liz, hi.
Sorry, a little 12-pound miniature dachshund thinking he's going to take on an 85-pound Great Pyrenees German Shepherd. Not a good mix. Let's see here. Back to, he thinks he can do it, and that's the scary thing. Where did we go? That's not it. That's not it. That's not it. For some reason, I lost that page. It's right there. Okay, try that again. There we go. Okay. The parsing. So you've got an example here. And this is very detailed, okay? I will scan a couple of handwritten ones and post those to show you what it should look like if you do it handwritten. This is not a poem that we're doing, okay? It is in the textbook. But what you've had, and I'll just look at the first couple of lines to give you an idea of what I'm looking for, all right? So with the first line, notice what I've done here, and you do not have to do this, okay? I've given the line of how it would appear in Old English font, Old English handwriting, okay? This is the text as it appears in the textbook. This is what you need to include, okay? And then above that text, what you need to do is you need to indicate parts of speech. So, Ayala is an INT, and I'm drawing a blank what INT stands for. It's not interrogative, it is interjection, okay, right there. So I've given you, a very confusing key for symbols, but if you can think up a one that makes more sense, by all means do so. So interrogative for the word Ayala, Arundel, okay? It's a noun. SM means it's strong, it's masculine, it's nominative, and it's singular, okay? And then there's another noun. ENGL, it's a noun, strong, masculine, genitive, so it's possessive case, plural. And the ending on it is what tells you that it's genitive. If you go all the way back up here. Genitive, masculine, plural, A ending. Okay, so we'll go back down. Beartast. Okay, Beartast. It's an adjective. It's masculine. I haven't included it, but I should have. It's strong. Why? Because it agrees with these two. Okay. Nominative, agrees with this one. Nominative, singular, but it's an adjective, so what else do you have to include? What form of the adjective? Is it positive, comparative, or superlative? Positive, base form of the adjective. Comparative, next form, fast, faster, superlative, fastest. Well, this is beartast. It's the superlative form, brightest. So, Eärendil, Morning Star. If any of you are Tolkien fans, you recognize the name right there. This is Eärendil, essentially, or Eärendil. Okay. Eärendil, Morning Star, brightest of angels. Okay. Notice the adjective agrees with the noun. Okay, because it's modifying this. Brightest Eärendil of angels, okay, over, move thing, why are you not moving? We'll do the next line too. So over, preposition, with accusative, and what that means is you'll find in the book will tell you when you have a preposition that takes the accusative case. That means the thing that comes after the preposition is going to be accusative, all right? So notice what comes after the preposition. Bear in mind, what does preposition mean? Pre-positioned. It comes before. This is why grammarians in the 19th century, 18th and 19th century, said you should invented the rule, because they invented it out of whole cloth, never existed before then, invented the rule that you should never end a sentence with a preposition, because a preposition always comes before something. Well, if it comes at the end of the sentence, it can't come before something. They created that rule out of Latin, because in Latin, prepositions are literally connected to the word that they come before. You can't break them apart. It's like the split infinitive rule. In Latin, an infinitive is one word. You cannot split it. In English, you can, because it's two words, to go. So the greatest split infinitive in the English language. To boldly go where no one has gone before, etc. So, over midden yard, it's a noun, it's singular, it's masculine, it's accusative. Why? Because it's following a preposition that requires the accusative. It's strong and masculine, and it's singular. After that, monum, noun, masculine, dative, plural. Remember what I said about endings? They're almost always going to be dative plurals. So you translate that to, for, with, etc. Okay? Sended. Sent. It's a weak verb, first class of the weak verbs. And it is, I'm drawing a blank on what PP is. Past participle. Okay? So over Middle Earth, the world, for men sent. So, brightest morning star, the brightest of angels, sent over the earth for men, and then the rest of the poem goes on. This is an Advent lyric, okay? It's for the season of Advent. And then you have the translation at the bottom there. Okay. 453. Let's see. I wonder if this will let me do that. Yes. Let's briefly, because you've gotten an awful lot. Let me talk about some of these Old English materials. So this is the Peter Baker's Old English Aerobics link. We should open in a new site. Yeah, and if you look at that, so you've got his anthology here and a glossary. I haven't even looked at it in this while. So you've got the texts in the edition. And notice the ones that say no login required. That means you can read those. You can look at those. Some of them come with sound. I don't know if that one will let me since I don't have. Oh, there it is. So you've got the text of Kenilworth and Kinahard right there. Notice that's not very long. But it's just full of pronouns. And then there's an audio version. Don't know if that's going to let me play. The audio version doesn't look like it will. Okay. You got a link to his readings on YouTube, which I've also put there. Okay, let me go back. Old English materials. So the magic cheat sheet, this thing is amazing. Well, if you're a language nerd like I am.
Dr. Sherman?
Yes.
Just to note, when you open up a new window, you have to share that window.
Did that not share? Oh,
no,
okay.
you have to share the new window.
I have to share the new window. Okay. So is this window being shared?
We can see D2L right now.
You can see D2L, but you cannot share. Okay.
So if you click on screen share, you should have an option to share whichever window you want.
Yeah, because it never told me. There it goes. Okay, because it never told me that I wasn't. It still shows you are screen sharing at the top. Does that show up?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is his cheat sheet. So you've got the paradigms for all the personal pronouns, paradigms for the demonstrative pronouns, paradigms for all the nouns, showing the case endings, the inflectional endings and such, verbs for the weak, all the strong, and notice he color codes them as well. So if you print this out in color, it becomes helpful. Okay, and notice just this little sheet he's got copyrighted because I mean this took some work. Okay, all right, let me go back. Let's stop that share. Go back. There. And back to that one. The Old English readings on YouTube. The complete corpus of Anglo-Saxon poetry is exactly what it sounds like. Every Old English poem. You've got the text of it right there. So this can make it a little bit easier when it comes time to doing translations because you can pull up the poem, print it out so that you have large space in between the lines. Or you can do, because I didn't have that capability back in 1990 or whenever, you can just write it in between the lines in your book. It kind of makes it harder. What I would actually do when I did this course is I would photocopy the pages of the book and just blow up the pages, 150, 200%, and write it all in between there. Okay. Bibliography of materials for the study of Anglo-Saxon. It's exactly what it sounds like. It includes a pretty good list. It's not complete by any means. Old English affixes is another thing that I scanned. Can't remember. I was going to just pull up the paper one I have. That gives you the meanings of words that are added at I think it's primarily at the beginning of words, showing how it emphasizes, how it intensifies, how it changes meanings a little bit of words. It gives you a list of, I don't remember how many, 20 or 30 different words, I think it is. That's useful to just keep with you. Cadman skin by Sievers is something we'll talk about later. We won't do this today because my throat's getting sore and your eyes look like they're starting to glaze over. We're going to spend some time next week talking about this backgrounds of English and the Old English historical period. because the translation part won't take us a real long time. In the chronology of Anglo-Saxon literature's related subjects, it's kind of the same thing. It's a background, a lot of dates, a lot of titles, things like that. Germanic noun paradigms, we'll talk about a little bit. It goes into Ablaut and how that kind of stuff works. Or part of it does, at least. This is more endings for across Germanic languages. And then texts for several of the poems we'll be doing. Text for all of the poems. And it looks like two prose pieces. Okay. Any questions? Any concerns?
I have lots of concerns, but
Go ahead.
we'll just see how it goes.
Yeah. That's. I'll tell you what.
All the concerns.
Doing this in here, this is not a good way. I'll tell you right now. This is definitely not a good way to learn Old English, to teach Old English. This is the kind of material you need to be in person. You need to be around a table, so you can have a lot of give and take. I usually tell the students, and I didn't begin with this, and I usually do, so I'll do it now. This is the hardest. If you take this in Beowulf, these are the hardest 2 years you'll ever have in school. I mean, our hardest 2 courses. These are the hardest things you will do. Unless as an English major you flip and, you go take engineering or, quantum physics or something like that. They're not the hardest because they're the most intellectually challenging, though they are. They're the hardest because they require hard work. I mean, you gotta set aside a block of time. Probably not as much for next week, but I can guarantee you 3 weeks from now, you better set aside 10 hours a week just for Old English. I mean, because you're going to start translating, and you're going to be pulling your hair out. I can't find the word in the glossary. I'll tell you right now. Every word you need to find, it is back there. Inevitably, it will happen. Somebody will say, this word is not there. And I'll say, tell me the word. And they'll tell me the word, and I'll find it because they're there. Now, I'll also point out, I won't point it out right now, but there are a couple of errors in the glossary. Okay? They're not major. Well, let me rephrase that. Errors in the first edition. They might be corrected in the second edition because I don't have the second edition. I don't have the thumb tabs for the letters on my glossary like I do in the first edition. The last time I taught this, I'm not positive the second edition was out. It might have been. But they're there. So you've just got to set yourself the time to do it. Okay? And when you get to Beowulf, it'll probably be more than 10 hours. Because when you do Beowulf, you're translating 200 to 300 lines a week. And it's poetry. It's not none of it's straightforward. But it's not straightforward prose. And sometimes when you're reading the poetry, you don't know who the subject is for 2 or 3 lines. You're reading on along and, oh, look at that. There it is. And it kind of jumps out at you. And I'm not kidding. When we get to Kenilworth and Kenilworth, some of you are going to go, I'm done. Nope. Can I still drop? No, you can't drop by then, but, it's going to be hard. Okay? But I'll try to prepare you for it. Other questions, comments, concerns? So are you clear about what's due for next week? The first bit of stuff on the syllabus for 9-1, okay? Translate the material that's there. Try to find an article that has something to do, let's say, with Old English translation of Genesis, Old English language, Alfred's colloquy, because of other background reading, the beginning of the Anglo-Saxon invasions, migrations. I mean, Old English history. You can do that for the first article. I mean, pretty much anything within Old English culture. Okay, if you can find something, go ahead.
I'm the person that likes medieval nuns, and so I didn't know if I could find something on Anglo-Saxon nuns. Probably not. Anyway.
Yeah, you can. You might want to. Let's see here. Yeah, definitely. In fact, I mean, there's even in your textbook, if you want to, it's something I've not assigned this time. But in the teaching and learning part, after Alfred's colloquy, there's section 2C, the age of the virgin. I mean, it's not necessarily about nuns, but close. Later on, you have in section 4, chapter 21, you've got two holy women about St. Athelthryth and St. Eugenia from Alfred's Lives of the Saints and from the Old English Martyrology. If you want to look up something about, one of those. If you want to look up Abbess Hild, so there's a nun.
Yeah, there's a nun.
Abbess of Whitby Monastery. She's responsible for Cadman, largely writing the poetry that he writes, according to Bede. So if you want to do something, Hild would be fantastic.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay, great.
Happy now.
All right. Other questions?
So we just have the translations of Genesis and
Translation.
What about person? Like, which ones are we?
I'll send that out. Tonight or tomorrow. Okay.
that's the parsings I couldn't hear.
Yeah, the parsing.
Oh, okay.
Probably I'll do it from Genesis because I think that'll make it a little easier than doing it from Alfred's, in the schoolroom kind of a thing. In fact, let's just say, just do the first 5 lines. The first 5 lines of Genesis 8, 6 through 18.
Okay. For the parsings or the translation are you talking about?
That's for the parsing. So translate those 2 passages from Genesis. It's what? 12 and 5 lines, so 17 lines total about. And then Alfred's colloquy, reading the background material in Alexander and Campbell. We'll discuss that in the sense when we discuss the Anglo-Saxon history generally. I won't make specific reference, I don't think, to Alexander or Campbell. Every now and then I will make reference to Campbell to an illustration or a photograph, to talk about Anglo-Saxon metalwork or something like that. When we get to Kenilworth and Kinnaird might be a good one. We might talk a little bit about the Sutton Hoo discovery in the 1930s because it's about the same time period as those two, and might pull up some other images of Anglo-Saxon metalwork and that kind of stuff. So while this class focuses on the text, it's kind of an introduction to the entire culture. In one thing, I'll finish with this. One thing I want you to try to do as you read and translate the material, and what I'm asking is an impossibility, and I know that, okay? But I'm asking you to do your best. Take your 21st century mindset, your 21st century worldview, your 21st century thoughts about politics, the environment, whatever. Put it on a bookshelf. Try to enter this mindset. And this is one of the reasons, for some of the background reading to help you. So enter into a mindset, for example, where, one, assume, first of all, you're a Christian. Doesn't mean you're a quote-unquote Bible-believing Christian because you don't have a Bible. That is, you don't personally have a copy of the Bible you can read. Your church might have a copy of the Gospels, but it probably doesn't have a copy of the entire Bible, okay? But you go to church regularly, you may very well pray 7 times a day, the 7 hours of prayer, okay? Individually or corporately, you might go to church for that. You believe in the reality of the supernatural. You believe in the reality of demons. You believe in the reality that there are things that are not demons that are floating around in the world around you. Spirits, okay? So that, for example, when the Beowulf poet writes about Grendel, some people believe that, things like Grendel were real. Now, I kind of believe they are. They're just named Jeffrey Dahmer and, name your other modern Grendel kind of a thing. But try to enter into the Anglo-Saxon mindset, okay? Your king is important. Your family is everything. And when I say your king, I don't mean the English king, because there is no English king. There's no single king of a land called England until Alfred in 878. So the time we're talking about, beginning, chieftains, clan is everything. Honor culture. So, if you've ever seen The Untouchables with Sean Connery and, Kevin Costner, they come after, one of ours, we get 2 of theirs. They bring a knife, we bring a gun. You kill mine, I wipe out yours. It's that mentality. It's the feudal, not the feudal, it's the feud structure. Where you start a fight with me, that fight goes until one of our families is wiped out. Mm-hmm. Genocide, okay? Okay, we'll stop there. Unless you have other questions or comments.
I have just one question because I'm a little confused about the Christianity part. Okay, so I thought that the Viking Edda, poetic Edda thing was pagan or whatever.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So
and that when you die you go to Odin's house and whatever, and the warriors, they get to fight all day and eat all night kind of thing.
If they're lucky, if they die right. Okay, let me let me clarify a little bit. So when I talked about entering in that mindset, most of the literature we will be reading is written by Christians and for Christians. The only 2 examples that aren't clearly Christian are Wolf and Edwalker and The Wife's Lament. And those are 2 that we're reading at the end of the semester. We don't know when they were written. We don't know where they were written. For almost none of this literature do we have a hard and fast date, a time that we can set it in. I mean, Alfred we can because we know Alfred's dates. But The Wanderer, The Seafarer, we don't. We don't know when they were written. Dream of the Rood, we know part of that poem survives on a stone cross. The cross dates from 700 to 725 AD. Most of us assume the carving on the cross was done on the cross before the cross was set up. So the carving on the cross is contemporaneous with its date of construction, 700, 725. So that kind of indicates, at the very least, Dream of the Rood, or the lines that are on the cross at least, date from 700, 725. Bede, who Cadman records, Cadman who Bede records, Cadman's hymn pretty good idea. It dates from the late 7th century, 680 or so, because Cadman died right around 681. Most of the other poetry probably dates from later in the Anglo-Saxon period. At the very least, what we can say is it all dates to the manuscripts that record it. And all of those manuscripts date to a period right around 1000 AD, at which point Anglo-Saxon England is thoroughly Christian. Thoroughly. And by that I mean there aren't any pagan holdouts anymore. Now, there are some Jews, yes. Probably not any Muslims in Anglo-Saxon England. There might be some, closeted ones. But Christianity is the dominant religion. From the time when Roman Christianity is introduced in 597, and we'll talk about this next week, is introduced in 597, it spreads like wildfire. I mean, it spreads quickly. And Bede gives us that account, which we will talk about later when we get to Bede. Because Bede gives us, I think, a very interesting portrayal of the decision-making that went into, the first of the kings who said, okay, we're going to become Christian, and why. And the portrayal that he gives is, it's a portrayal of competing stories, competing ideologies. The pagan Germanic ideology is one that's offered in the story, and the Christian ideology is the other one. And it's kind of a competition between, okay, let's compare them with how life really works, kind of a thing. And we'll talk about that when we get to it. So assume for most of the literature, you're a Christian, but what that means is you go, you take the Eucharist, you attend, Mass, you attend services, but you've not read the Bible on your own. You're not like a modern day quote-unquote fundamentalist or anything like that. You believe the rituals of the church. You believe what's said. It's not like, trying to remember the name of the author. It's not like, it's not Robert Cornwell's The Last Kingdom series. Which is about an Anglo-Saxon hero who's a pagan, kind of becomes Christian, reverts to his paganism because he's actually Danish. Okay, another word for the Danes in Anglo-Saxon time was heathen. Just heathen. Okay, they were synonymous. Dane and heathen. Didn't matter whether you were a Norwegian or Swedish or Icelandic. Dane, heathen. Heathen can only be used in one context, though, right? It can only be used in the context of non-heathen. It's one of the interesting things about that word. Heathen can only be used within a Christian context. Pagan can be used outside Christian context. Heathen can't. Heathen presupposes the other part. And heathen is a word that then shows up in things like Beowulf to describe some of the people. Okay? So, about that, the pagan mindset, all that, that's to get into the mindset of the Anglo-Saxons who invaded Britain in 450 AD up until the time that they became Christianized, beginning around 600 up to 700. Okay? The Pantheon. I mean, our modern English days of the week, they all come from pagan Germany, or German paganism, except for Sunday. But Monday, Tuesday is Tears Day, the god who gets his hand bitten off by Fenris Ulf, part of Ragnarok. Wednesday, Woden's Day. Thursday, Thor's Day. Friday, Frigg's Day, etc. Other questions? All right. We'll leave a little early. Have a good rest of the evening.
Thank you.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dr. Sherman.
Bye.
Dr. Sherman,
Yes.
I just talked to Miss Flanagan, and she says I am on the list.
You are on the list.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, it's Sarah Wolf.
Sarah Wolf,
Yep, that's me.
not Sarah Lonan, I think is what it had.
Sorry.
That's okay.
It's just how it is.
I don't know where I did with the roll. Okay, I'll make sure I mark it off. I had it right in front of me. Okay, great. Thanks.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Mm-hmm.